All right, how's everyone doing today? Good, good. Thank you for asking. Attendance is a little slow today, I guess. Yeah, let's wait for a bit for more people to join. So Hafsa actually has a lot going on. She's kind of directing us as well. She's doing her PhD on the side. So she just can't like gather up enough time for the lectures. Thank you. I'm glad that you guys are getting the concepts. Always glad to help. Um, when when we are talking about the topic of concepts, how far are we with the lectures? Are we still doing the API assignment or have you moved on to React? Just getting to know the status of everyone's progress. So a lot of you are still going with the API lectures. Some of you have started React. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, as long as you guys are following with the lectures, even if you're a little behind, later on when you're taking a look at the lecture videos again or the material that we post, it's gonna be much, much simpler for you. Wouldn't have to go through the whole thing like that. The best way to do it, I would say, is start doing the assignment, the project, learn hands-on, because you have the basics from the lectures. And when you begin coding, just refer back to the lectures again when you're stuck or maybe you have confusion about a particular concept. So that helps a lot. That way, with practice, you can understand that which part actually needs which concept because we only sort of learn when we are doing something and kind of face issues. Once you face a problem and you learn the solution, you never forget. That's the best part about practice. I mean, Errors, it's a given, right? Whenever you're coding, you will definitely face some errors, but the main idea is to solve the problems, right? Being a programmer, this is one of the biggest task, problem solving. So if you find an error, you can definitely look it up online. You have ChatGPT. We are here to help as well. So don't be scared of errors. Just know that errors are a good way to learn. All right, so for today, we are gonna essentially focus on React routers. So for the first lecture over here, I will be introducing the concepts, and later on in the evening, you are gonna take a look at the implementation of React routers. All right, so let us slowly begin. Ideally, yes. I think it's 2 weeks, but for different cohorts, the deadline's different. But I believe it's 2 weeks. If you do have extenuating circumstances, do send an email to support and just let us know what's going on, and we can definitely consider. All right, so React routers. Let me share my screen. All right, I believe everyone can see my screen. So let's slowly begin. All right, so React routers. What do we understand based on just the name itself? Anyone? Student success, I'm not sure. I'll have to ask. We will let you. But yeah, back to the question that I was asking. What is React Router? Something to do with channeling? Yeah, that is one of the purpose of using React routers. Components, not as much. They're like remotely connected, but it's mostly mainly just making sure navigation throughout your website is much more smooth. Because so far before, we have seen that for navigating through different pages, yes, exactly, GoFront's correct. Navigating through pages. So yeah, before we've seen that to navigate to different pages, we have to use a tag where we kind of just state the reference, and if we click on it, it takes us to a new page. But React being a single page application, we can't really do that kind of referencing where we just open up a new page as it is. But for React routers, that allows us to navigate to different pages on a single page application. So that's the main advantage of using React routers. So let's see what a React router actually is. React Router is essentially a JavaScript framework. Yes, you were correct, Kristen. It's a new framework. It's a JavaScript framework that lets us handle client and server-side routing in React application. It enables the creation of single-page web or even mobile apps that allow navigating through refreshing the page. It allows us to use browser history features for preserving the right application view as well. Aren't pages the same as components? No. Components are parts of a page. And React Router helps us navigate through the pages, and the page itself kind of navigates through the components. We'll take a look into how that happens later on with probably like a diagram or something. I can annotate on the screen and show you. But essentially, React Router, this is what it does. It kind of streamlines the navigation between pages using React. So in the previous slide, we saw something about client-side versus server-side routing. Now, what do you guys think the difference could be? Like, what do you understand by client-side and server-side? Anyone? Client-side is in the browser, you're correct. Routing is managed by client or server, whoever side it is. No, the server is not us. So how it works is essentially client side is, like Novita said, is the browser. Server side is we have a specific server that kind of reroutes everything for us. In most cases, the servers are the domains or hostings that we use. Server is in the cloud. Yes, exactly. So let's kind of take a look at the differences over here. So first, let's take a look at client-side routing. Now, for client-side routing, we can see over here, the first thing is routing logic in browser. So what happens is everything that we are doing is happening in the browser. We don't really go to the server as much as we do from server-side routing features. Most of the work is done in the client side, which is the browser. Then we have single page applications. So client side routing is commonly associated with single page applications, where the entire web application is essentially loaded as a single HTML page, and navigation between different views or pages is handled without the full page reloads. One example, I mean, is definitely React. React is essentially a single page web application. React applications are single page web applications. So the thing about that is most of it that's done, it's done through the React bundle that we receive, or the React bundle that is generated using all our components. In other words, all our JavaScript files, right? So all that is being used or manipulated to change the view of a single page application. Then we have the feature where it's fast and responsive. So since only the content that needs to change is loaded dynamically, client-side routing can provide a faster and more responsive user experience. Only the necessary data is fetched from the server and the rendering is done on the client side. We can apply both in React. We definitely can. We'll see the difference of how both of them work. But yeah, we can definitely apply both in React. It's essentially just how you're using it. But React applications usually tend to be client side. So then we have smooth transitions. So client-side routing allows for smooth transitions between pages as the navigation is handled asynchronously. Changes in the URL can trigger updates to the view without reloading the entire page. So from this, you could summarize that the most important feature over here is that you're able to make changes without having to reload the whole page. That saves you time, which is probably a very big issue when it comes to deploying a big project. Say you're using LinkedIn, you click on a post or you try to react to a post, and the reaction takes maybe say 3-4 seconds more than it does now. I'm pretty sure at one point it would seem bothersome that why is this taking so long? It seems very small, the 3 or 4 seconds, but in the long run, based on user experience, it could be very annoying in the future when a lot of things are piled up together. So let's go into server side now. So for server side routing, the routing logic is essentially done on the server. So every time you try to load a page, a request is sent to the server and the server returns a new HTML page, which is essentially viewed on your browser. That's what you've done so far, right? You're creating a new, when you click on a link or maybe you click on a element on a nav bar, it takes you to a whole different page. So that could be an example of server side. Traditional multi-page app. So server-side routing is more commonly used for traditional multi-page applications where navigation to different views or pages typically involves full page reloads. It takes a it has a slower initial load. So for server-side routing, it can result in slower initial page loads. Why? Especially for larger applications, because the entire page is reloaded from the server each time a new view is requested. So maybe say your website, it's going heavy on CSS. It has a lot of images in different places. You have a lot of different components, a lot of different colors. So whenever you have a lot of images, that usually takes up time rendering when you're rendering the whole thing again and again. So that's a drawback. But one good thing is that it has lower client-side complexity because most of the work it's done in the server. So the client side, essentially the browser, it's not as worked up as the server. So the browser can kind of do what it has to do without stressing on reloading or working through the bundles or navigating through the pages itself. It just essentially displays it. Any questions so far? Anyone? Any questions? All right. So in the next slide, let's see a sort of drawing on how that works. Let me annotate. So let me draw two boxes. Let's call this the browser, and let's call this the server. All right. So when you open up a website, how it usually works is every time it will be sending a request to the server, and once the server receives the request, it will work on which page you are asking to view, and it will send back another. It will send back that page, that particular page that you were looking for, and that will be viewed on your browser. So every time, say you have a nav bar and you are, so let's think of this as a nav bar, right? Let me just put dividers over here. Okay. So when you click on a specific, maybe a page on a nav bar or an element on a nav bar, what it will do, it will send a request to the browser server, and the server will send you that page to display on the browser. But for client-side applications or client-side routing, what happens is, let's get rid of this. So for client-side routing, you're still sending a request initially when you open the first page, or maybe the home page of your website, or the landing page as we call it. So it will send a request to the server, and the server will be returning the website itself. But the difference between the two is that this time it will not only send back the web page itself, it will also send back the React bundles. What does the React bundle include? React bundle includes all the components that you had in JS files in your project. So that's the first step. When you're using client-side routing, it sends a request and the server returns these. But then when you're trying to navigate through pages, how does that work? Say this is home, this is contact, and this right here is about. So say we click on contact, what will happen? A request will be sent but the request won't be sent to the server. Instead, the request would be sent to the React bundle over here. So we can call this React bundle. So yeah, what happens is the React bundle kind of intercepts the request and sends back the page or the component that you were looking for. So the browser is asking for contact page, and React will send back the components necessary for the contact page. Does this make sense? Works same for about or any other page. Even if you have like um, a link to a different page that you want to go to in the middle of your website, it doesn't have to be the nav bar. So in general, if you want to reroute to a different page, React kind of intercepts and sends back the components itself instead of sending it to the instead of letting the request go to the server. No, once the initial connection is made, like once the initial request is done, the server sends everything it has to the browser, and the rest is done in the browser. So as we've seen in like previous lectures, we're not really reloading the whole thing. We're sending in components or maybe a certain part that's being added or changed. That's what React helps us with. It kind of intersects because a server doesn't really send a single element or a single component. The server will send back the whole website. So Samina asks, does the bundle get deleted on client side when the browser is closed? Yes. So every time you open that website, it will be sending you a request. It will be sending a request to the server, and the server will be returning those again. Now, depends on how it's coded, because we do have the cache as well. Maybe some stuff could be saved in the cache, but then again, that's not really an issue because when you open the page at the very beginning, it's gonna send a request to the server. Like the whole thing, the React bundles, the pages, all that is stored in the server. The server isn't deleting anything. It's just on request, the server sends those components or elements back to the browser so that the browser can take care of them as the browser wishes. All right, does that make sense? We understand the difference between a regular multi-paged application and a single-paged application like React. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that part. It just, when you do that, the React bundle kind of just sends back the components, and in your URL, you will be seeing differences like this. When it's in the home page, likely it will be just a slash. When it's maybe in the contact page, you'll see slash contact. When it's in the about page, you would likely see slash about. So React takes care of all that. All right, understood? All right, then let's move forward to the next slide. URL breakdown. So we've all seen URLs, right? But do we know how to actually break down a URL? Anyone with experience with this from before? All right, so let's take a look at it. So the first thing we have is scheme. Now, what's a scheme? The scheme essentially specifies the protocol used to access the resource. So, for example, in this particular link that we have, the URL that we have, what do you think the scheme is? HTTPS, you're correct. So over here, HTTPS, which is essentially Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, the S stands for secure. So Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, that's what the protocol should be for this particular URL. Yes, Esra, you're correct. And the domain or the host will be www.example.com. So that's the domain or the host for this particular website. Then we have query parameters. So one thing that I forgot to add, I believe, I should have added to the slide. I'll just add it at the end over here. It's path. So let's talk about the path first. The rest after domain is resource. Not exactly. So after example.com, we see /products, right? That's our path. Or you could even call it our endpoint. If it's an API, that's our endpoint. Or you could even call it our path for the URL. So essentially it shows that this website will be going to its subcategory, which is products, or sub-website, which is products. The whole path is the URL. It is, but then again, like specifically, the /products is the path. The whole thing, it's the URL. It's called URL. You can't really call that path. The whole link, it's the URL. But /products is the path. And after that, the rest, it is, you could say it is our resource in a way. Product is the endpoint. Yes, you're correct. Like if you've seen from mock API, after mockapi.io, you already always have like / then the name of your resource, right? So yeah. In terms of that example, the mock API example, which essentially looks like this, right? Say HTTPS www.mockapi.io / let's say class. So yeah, in this link over here, I think I should have added an O, but that's okay. In this example over here, after / over here, we have class. This class, from the dashboard, you could see when you add a new resource, you have to put a name. The name of the new resource is essentially the new path for our URL. So it essentially leads our domain to that particular resource. But after that, you can see we have a lot of stuff that probably doesn't make as much sense. The question mark ID 123 and all that. So these are query parameters. So what are query parameters? These are additional information appended to the URL. These are typically used to pass data to the server or modify the request. In these cases, query parameters are always going to be put after a question mark, and they are usually separated using AND operators. So in this case, we're passing in two parameters, which are ID and category. Does that make sense? Are we all clear so far? All right. There's one other thing over here that you guys can see. It's called the fragment identifier. Now, when we were doing basic HTML, if you remember, our links would have something like this at the end. Hashtag, then let's call it maybe about. Do you guys remember this? So if you remember for this, so this was used in order to get different sections in the HTML file. Remember, we used to just use hashtag, then the name of the ID in the reference for the nav bars, and when we click on that element, it would take us to that particular section. So that's what this is used for. The hashtag is essentially identifying specific sections within your resource or within the path. In other words, within the website. Does that make sense? So this is mostly used just for an HTML document. Is it the same for React? Yes, depending on how you design it. Because React also has sections, right? So yeah, it could work for React as well. But this hashtag about is essentially just talking about a specific section in an HTML document. Because essentially, even for React is nothing different. React, the way we code it, it's different. But for the browser, it's the same thing. It's going to see a full HTML code because the browser only displays the HTML code itself. It doesn't really display JavaScript like that. The changes we make in the code, that's different. That's from our end, but the browser only takes a look at the HTML, CSS. So yeah, even for React, this could work because React, the website sees a full code, and depending on how you design it or how you code it, you can definitely come up with these hashtag sections. Make sense? Clear for everyone? So, oh, I think I should get rid of these. The drawings. Yeah, API key as well. So like I said, so API key over here, it's a parameter that you're sending. Take a look at this. In these cases, these are IDs and categories, but for an API, maybe it could have been a key. Does that make sense? This was actually a good example, Hannah. For API, for as query parameters, we send keys to the link. Okay, so was this the last slide? Oh yeah, it was. Look at that. We're done with React routers, at least the basics of it. ID category for fragment identifier. No, ID and category, they are same as when you're sending a key to your link, your URL, or whichever server you're sending it to. These are counted as query parameters. We could call them variables as well, sort of. So these are the values that the URL or the server would ideally need to complete your request. For example, the key that you send for your API that is needed for your server to complete the request because it needs the API key to validate what it's gonna do. But without it, will it work too? I mean, depending on your website, like if you don't have to pass any parameters, you don't need it. You could just end the link over here till products. That's it. So depending, if you have to send a variable or a parameter, you will ideally need this query parameters like ID or key, whatever. So it all depends on what kind of request you're sending to the server. When you're getting data from an API, yes, it is server routing essentially. You're sending a request to the server and the server is sending back information in return. Where is fragment in this address? This address does not have fragments. Fragments are essentially used for like getting a section in an HTML document. If you can check out the previous programs that we've done. I think we had quite a few examples for fragments over there. You can check those out just for reference. I believe if you take a look at the recipe website that we made in class, I think that also had one. Or even like the first HTML lecture, that should have these hashtag sections as well. But JSON file may contain many fragments. So for JSON file, it's kind of different. Let me search up JSON file URL example. Okay, let's take a look at these. Even for these, you see, we are essentially setting the path for these. We are not really using fragments. Fragments are essentially used just for HTML documentation. All right, so we have a City Bike NYC over here. So if we say we had a button over here saying City Bike NYC and we click on that, it would directly take us to this section and this part would likely have maybe say a hashtag city bikes or something. Does that make sense?
But it will not be after the question mark, not the hashtag. Like question mark city equal that thing, right?
No. So no, the question mark, you need the question mark before you send query parameters. So there's the difference. Let me just go back to the slide.
It's usually the question mark after it's gonna be the API key, then
Yeah.
the condition, right? And then it's gonna be the fragment identifier.
Yeah, exactly. Fragment identifier comes at the very last. You
Okay.
depending on, yeah, I think fragment identifiers come at the very last, but the question mark, that only is needed for query parameters. If you don't have any query parameter, you don't have any need to put question marks in the URL.
Mhm.
So Novita asks, so essentially we use both client and server routing simultaneously based on what we do on the side. If you just need to get to a different page within the site, not needing external data, we use client side. If we do anything that needed data accessing from external sites, then that will trigger server routing. Yes, you are correct. So when we are, say, getting an API, getting information from an API, we're sending information to that server, and that server gives us back all that information. But our local server, that only gets one request at the very beginning. For example, we use like when we do npm start, it opens up localhost 3000, right? So localhost 3000 gets one request at the very beginning, and it sends us all the necessary bundles components from React and the initial landing page with it. So the initial landing page that we get in the browser will be empty. So essentially, in the first request, the initial request, the server, our server, in this case, maybe localhost 3000, it sends back an empty page with our React bundles, and the React bundle, depending on the request, updates the empty page in the browser. Now, say we are getting information inside that code from another API. So that request will be going to another server, not our server, and creating a request for, in this case, getting information from that server, and that server will be sending whatever info it has or whatever data it has to our browser, and the browser will take care of all that. Does that make sense for you, Navita? All right, perfect. I hope it's clear on what's going on. Does everyone understand the URL breakdown, or do you still have questions about it? I can explain again. All good? All right, perfect. So yeah, I mean, you can play around with the URLs and see how each of those URLs look like. But ideally, they will have these components over here. Also, for the fragment, it depends on like the request. Likely when you're getting a fragment, it wouldn't have everything in one URL. So maybe the fragment would be coming after products over here. Maybe it would be something like this, hashtag section1. So it could be something like this. Depends, always depends on like what the request is from the URL based on that. Does that make sense? Do we understand how React routers essentially work? Any questions about React routers? Any conceptual questions? We understand how the client side and server side routings are happening. Is that clear? The difference between the two? All right, if that's all good, then we are pretty much done with this lecture. So let's go on a 10-minute break and let's come back. We're gonna have like an open session for questions on assignments. You guys can work on your React assignment or any previous assignment that you were doing, and you can definitely ask us questions. All right, so I will stop sharing and see you guys in 10 minutes.